It is Education Sabbath, and I would like to spend our time together this afternoon talking about godly parents and obedient children and the positive consequences of both of those things for our educational achievement. You see, if you plant an apple seed, an apple tree will grow and produce apples. I have yet to see an apple tree and an apple seed grow an apple tree but produce grapes. In other words, what you put in is what you're going to get out. If you didn't get it, you'll get it over lunch or by the time you get home this afternoon. You see, this subject matter concerns almost everyone. And so there is hardly a household that it does not touch. Parents, teachers, grandfathers and mothers, uncles, aunts, brothers and sisters, all have interest in this particular topic. And so few can be found who will not influence some parent or teacher in the management or rearing of their child or affect that child's training by suggestion or advice. Unfortunately, for many of our children, the village is dysfunctional. Several years ago, the reports were shocking and equally disappointing. It was broadly reported that we had reached a point where we had more African American males in jail than enrolled in college. Many disputed the statistics, but here is a statistic, a fact that we cannot dispute, we cannot deny. U.S. education is still separate and unequal. Verona, we're spending more money, yet it does not translate to better educational outcomes for some of our children. Here's the starting point. And it's different. African American parents, most of them who are less educated than their white counterparts, don't expect their children to attain as much education as their white counterparts. By age 2, how old? Age 2. Disparities already show themselves between African American children and white children. African American children are much more likely than their white counterparts to be enrolled in low quality daycare. I'm talking daycare. African American students are nearly 3 times more likely to be held back as their white counterparts. They're also more likely to drop out before earning their high school diploma. African American students entering kindergarten. What did I say? Kindergarten. For the first time, score lower than their white counterparts on reading, mathematics, science, cognitive flexibility, and their approaches to learning. African Americans are suspended, are expelled at 3 times the rate of white students. Schools serving more minority populations have less experience, lower paid teachers who are more likely to be uncertified. African Americans are underrepresented in gifted and talented programs. They take fewer advanced placement classes than their white counterparts and score lower on advanced placement tests. Fewer African American students make it from enrollment to graduation. And the ones that do, graduation takes longer. I could go on, but I think I've made my point. And so this brief summary of the situation is not from 20, 10, or even 5 years ago. Try January 2015. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, we have work to do. And so allow me for the next few minutes to demonstrate how we can tackle this problem. And so the reading of the word took us to the book of Daniel. Go there with me, Daniel chapter 1. And I'm going to read in your hearing once again verses 3 and verse 4. And it reads, "And the king spake unto the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the nobility, children in whom was no blemish, but was favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge and understanding science, and such as had the ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans." My subject this afternoon, worthy to stand. Would you pray for me and with me? Father, free me that I may capture some wandering soul. Bless me that I may bless another. And when all is said and done, Lord, I pray that an impression so severe would be left upon our minds that we will forever be changed. May we be found worthy to stand. Amen. It was a bleak day in the history of Israel. Daniel's parallel account of Nebuchadnezzar's siege of Judah was predicted by Isaiah in 2 Kings chapter 20, but occurred in 2 Kings chapter 24. And so the story is told in 2 Kings chapter 20 of Nebuchadnezzar's sickness. And so faced with the news of his pending death, Hezekiah was not ready to die. For he was told in verse 1 to set your house in order. In other words, get ready to die. And so the Bible is unclear as to why, but I could only imagine that, like most of us, Hezekiah had things that he still wanted to do. And so he cried out, "Not me, not now, not like this." And so in verse 2 and 3, he petitioned the creator of life for an extension of life. But how quickly, like Hezekiah, we forget the Lord's blessings, and we fail to testify to others about the miracles he has performed in our lives. The Lord had just answered his prayer for extended life. Verse 6, "I will add unto thee 15 years. And when guests came to visit him in verse 12, Hezekiah had nothing to say about it. And is that not like us? God, he blesses us. We are blessed with a new job, a home, a car, a raise. And yes, Jerry, we get tickets to see the Mets in the World Series. Or maybe some miracle beyond human explanation and comprehension has been performed in our lives, and we fail to testify about it. And now we get to verse 14 and 15. And then Isaiah the prophet showed up. Oh boy. "And just what were these men doing here?" he said to Hezekiah. "Where did they come from and why?" Hezekiah responded, "They came from far away. They came from Babylon." "And what did they see in your palace?" "Everything," said Hezekiah. "There isn't anything that I did not show them. I gave them the grand tour. There is nothing among my treasure that I did not show them." You see, from this statement, it is clear that an extension of life and being a witness to the sun going backwards was not treasured by Hezekiah. And Isaiah in verse 16 said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord." Saints, we need to be very careful. When someone shows up and says to us, "Hear the word of the Lord." And this was the word of the Lord to Hezekiah, verses 17 and 18. It says, "A day is coming when everything you own and everything your ancestors have passed down to you, right down to the last cup and saucer, will be cleaned out of here, plundered, packed off to Babylon." God's word. He says, worse yet, your sons, your descendants will end up as eunuchs in the palace of the king. And so this prediction by Isaiah was fulfilled in 2 Kings chapter 24, approximately 106 years later. The Lord, truly, the Lord is not slack concerning his promises. And so 100 years is a long time. Hezekiah died and Judah remained free. His son ruled for another 55 years and died, and still there was no captivity. His grandson ruled for another 31 years and still no captivity. Hear the word of the Lord, however, the Lord is not slack concerning his promises. I know, your great-grandparents were Seventh-day Adventists. Your grandparents were Seventh-day Adventists, and your parents were too. They've died, and still he has not returned. You've been waiting all your life, and now it is 2015, almost 2016, but still he has not returned. But didn't he promise you? Didn't he promise you no more pain? Didn't he promise you a golden crown? Didn't he promise you gates of pearl, streets of gold, a tree of life, a sea of glass, days without nights? Didn't he promise you a mansion in glory? Didn't he promise you that he would come again? Then hold on. If God said it, it will truly come to pass. Hear the word of the Lord. The Lord is not slack concerning his promises. I gotta move on. And now we get to the book of Daniel, and we witness the manifestation of Isaiah's prediction. The book of Daniel is famous for several well-known stories, and this is how one author summarizes the book of Daniel. A powerful king threatens to execute his wise men because they're not able to reveal and interpret his puzzling dream. 3 young men who refuse to worship a towering image are thrown into a superheated furnace, yet they survive. In the midst of a festive celebration, hundreds of individuals witness a handwriting on the wall that is mysterious. Evil conspirators have an elderly man thrown into a pit of lions, but he emerges without a scratch. A prophet of God sees 4 beasts in a vision, and their significance stretches millenniums into the future. And so, like this author, we frequently skip over verses 3 and 4 of Daniel 1 to get to Nebuchadnezzar's dreams and the fiery furnace. We jump over verses 3 and 4 to get to the handwriting on the wall and the lion's den. And yes, we Seventh-day Adventists frequently hop over verses 3 and 4 of Daniel 1 to get to what? The prophecies. And so it is tempting to bypass verses 3 and 4 and to speak about the dreams, the fiery furnace, the handwriting on the wall, or the lion's den, but I resisted the temptation. Instead, I want to focus on what got Daniel and his companions to Babylon. Stick with me. I'm going to explain what has to happen for us to attack the weaknesses in our educational systems. And here is a hint. It begins at home. You see, before they were interpreting puzzling dreams in Babylon, before they were walking with Jesus in the fiery furnace, before they were decoding mysterious handwritings, before they were napping with lions or prophesying about the future, they were obedient children in Judah who were trained well. It begins at home. And so before they were great men in Babylon, they were well-trained boys back home. Before there were perfect examples in Babylon, there were pleasing examples back home. I want to focus on what got these young men to Babylon. And so there is something different, something peculiar that ensured their selection. Something atypical about them that made them worthy to stand in the palace of the king. And so here is the question. What was so different? What was so atypical, so peculiar about Daniel and his companions? Well, I'm glad you asked. The answer is found in Daniel chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. And so if you skip over verses 3 and 4, you'll miss the source of their strength. And so I want you to understand that Daniel and his companions were of exceptional quality. They were the elite, the cream of the crop. These young men were not ordinary. And so following are the things that made them worthy to stand in the king's palace. They were without blemish, no physical defects. They had physical soundness and healthy physiques. Teresa, too many of our children don't know the meaning of BMI. Some of you don't either. Body mass index. You see, when the body, listen to me, when the body is in shape, the mind will also be in shape. And so being in shape helps you to learn. So these young men were in shape. Next, they were well favored. Their appearance, they were handsome. They were of a gracious personality. They were self-disciplined. Too many of our children don't get the assistance they need because they are unkept. Keep your head straight. And so we send them to school and we send them to church looking and smelling anyhow. Keep your eyes straight. And so no one wants to interact with them. I'm speaking from experience. We send them to school looking anyhow. These young men, however, their appearance was good. And so again, your appearance affects how you feel about yourself and your ability to produce in the classroom, your ability to learn. On a good day, on a very good day, I'm 5'8". 5'8", that's it. I'm not going to grow anymore. But when I am dressed, I'm 6'2". I'm confident, not cocky. I am confident that I can do and achieve anything. And so we need to send our children off to school looking and smelling their best with confidence that they can achieve and do anything. These young men, their appearance were of such that they can learn. I gotta move. Next, they were skillful in all wisdom. They were gifted, intelligent. They had the aptitude for every kind of learning. And so we don't expose ourselves or our children to enough. And so we need to understand that in every activity, there is an opportunity for learning. Next, they were cunning in knowledge. They were well informed. They were quick to learn and to understand. They were alert and sensible. And so we have to know a lot about one thing and even more about a lot of things. And so we must have a breadth of knowledge that would allow us to join in and to contribute to any conversation. I'm in the midst of talking with someone to conduct some trainings over the next few weeks. And we've been exchanging emails. And one of her responses to me, she made this statement. She says, common sense does not have a section index for today's society. Here is what I'm referring to. I'm talking about these young men were sensible. And so here's an email to me from one of my students about 3 to 4 weeks into the semester. And I'm going to read in her English, not mine. Good night, Professor. I just moved on dorms Friday, so I don't yet have any textbooks with me. I will be getting them this Friday. I was not aware that we will be needing them anytime soon. I apologize. 3 to 4 weeks into the semester, she still does not have her textbooks, and she had the audacity to first of all sit down or stand up wherever and write it and then push send. Those young men had common sense. I got to move on. They understood science and language and literature. They had book smarts. They held their own in the classroom. And so too many of our children think that it is dumb to be smart, and we're not helping them either. We need to help our young people learn another language. I missed my opportunity. I was in high school and didn't take advantage of it. And now I have to rely on a Rosetta Stone. But our young people have free of charge. Help them to learn another language. We live in a global society. Help our young people to understand that physics and biology and chemistry are not dirty words. Our children must be able to speak to the A. What do I mean by that? A few weeks ago, I was sitting in my office, and my office directly across from one of our conference rooms. And one of our professors was in the conference room with 2 students who were trying to start a business and had no clue. And so he was engaging them in conversation, trying to point them in the right direction. And after the conversation was finished, he stopped by. I'm not sure whether to say hello or whether or not he wanted to engage me in what I may have overheard. And so we exchanged greetings, and then he quickly segued. He said, these students, on paper, they have a 3.6 GPA. But then when you talk to them, they know nothing. I'm talking about speaking to the A. Here is another email from one of my students. My wife and I, we collect these, so hopefully I'm going to put them into a book one day. Hi, Professor. I hope everything is well at your end. Apparently, I'm reading it again in his English, not mine. Apparently, this semester is my 4th and last semester in the master's program. Within this program, my grades were mostly straight A's. However, I've never received a grade lower than an A-. I realized the breakdown of your grades and how you got to the B. However, in reality life, the idea of courtesy is well accepted. Knowing your good-hearted personality, I would like to ask for the courtesy to move my grade up at least to an A-. Thank you in advance. I'm talking about speaking to the A. And so parents, you need to understand that grades are being given out. And so just because your child has a 3-point, a 4-point, doesn't mean that they have learned anything. You need to make sure that your children are learning. I got to move on. And so they had the ability in them to stand in the king's palace. They were well-mannered. They were qualified to serve. They were poised enough to look good around the palace. They were the elite, the cream of the crop. And so these young men knew how to stand. Many of our young people don't know how to stand. They don't know how to sit. They don't know how to speak. They don't know how to present themselves. In most of my classes, my students have to stand and present. I teach them that public speaking is part of life, and you have to be able to do it. And so a few semesters ago, one of my students stood before the class to present to his colleagues with a hoodie on, with the hood on. And I allowed him to finish his presentation, and then he sat down, and I said to him, I called him by name, and I said, "Are you cold?" And he said, "Nah." And so I said to him, it was a rhetorical question, I wasn't necessarily looking for an answer. I said, "Then why would you stand in front of a class to make a professional presentation, not just with a hoodie, but with the hood on?" That young man is now in my class this semester. He had a presentation the other day. He stood up, made his presentation, no hoodie. It hasn't been cold as yet. There's more presentations to go, and I'm waiting to see what's going to happen. We got to teach our young people how to stand, how to present themselves. These young men had the ability in them to stand in the king's palace. And so Daniel and his companions had a solid foundation, and they were youth of remarkable ability and promise. And so here's the question: how do you rear children in 2016 with such exceptional quality? Children who will understand and accept their nobility. How did these young people become so fitted for these positions of such great trust and honor? And so I would like to share with you 7 things that ensured their selection and resulted in their captivity that made them worthy to stand in the palace of the king. Number 1, their parents early on were convinced of and acknowledged their responsibilities as parents. You see, what children learn in the nursery will be displayed throughout their lives. And so any child left without proper discipline and instruction is a potential disaster. And so too many of us wait till high school. Too many of us wait until high school to start parenting. That's too late. Too late. Point number 2. Their parents knew of, accepted, and imparted Christ. And so here's a question that every parent must ask. Will my child spend eternity with God? And so this is the question that should dominate our minds in all that we do for our children. Make sure that your children are acquainted with the Bible. Number 3, they were trained in the way they wanted to go and they were trained in the way that they should go and not in the way that they wanted to go. And so be sure that there is careful training at home. Self-will is almost the first thing to appear in a child's mind. And it must be your first step, parents, to resist it. It begins where? At home. And so the way you train a child will show up in his or her adult life and affect what he or she becomes. Number 4, their parents were a good example and a good influence. And so during the early years of life, parents stand in place of God to their children. And so that is an awesome responsibility. And so if our actions contradict our instructions, our children will not take us seriously. Be a role model. Set the right example. Point number 5. They were trained in the habit of having faith in and were instructed to obey their parents. And so we must train our children to believe what we say. They must have faith in us. A child is in no position to negotiate how he or she should be raised. Let me say it again. A child is in no position to negotiate with you, parents, how he or she should be raised. We are not made to be independent. We are not fit for it. Point number 6. Tenderness, affection, and patience were the hallmarks in their home, yet their parents were not overindulgent with them. And so they were not spoiled, but they were loved. Sternness and severity of manner causes children to be unresponsive and to back away. Love should be the golden thread that runs through all of our actions in dealing with our children. Tenderness, affection, and patience, but never overindulgence. And the seventh and final reason Daniel and his companions were worthy to stand in the palace of the king, their parents kept them busy. No created being was ever meant to be idle. It is the still water which becomes stagnant and impure. Let me say it again. It is the still water which becomes stagnant and impure. The running and moving streams are always clear. And so the active moving mind is a hard target for the devil to shoot at. So teach your children the value of time and try to make them learn the habit of using it well. Parents, it is your responsibility to create an environment where mental, physical, spiritual, and social powers can be developed and used. And so these were the 7 parental practices that ensured their selection and resulted in their captivity and made them worthy to stand in the palace of the king. And so when Daniel and his companions were separated from home and sacred influences and associations, they were true to the lessons that they were taught in their childhood. And so parents, as you rear your children, you are responsible for preparing them to live independently and to make wise decisions. And so the sterling character found in Daniel and his companions did not come about by luck, by accident, by destiny, or chance. The positive consequences of godly parenting and obedient children are proud parents and cream of the crop children. Educated children, children who are worthy to stand in the palace of the king. And so young people, I'm not blaming you. I'm not blaming our young people. Whether you are a delight or a disgrace, a blessing or a bluster, whether you bring happiness or humiliation, fulfillment or failure, comfort or concern, consolation or complaint, satisfaction or sorrow, to us, it is mostly our responsibility, not yours. So Leanne, I'm going to ask you to start to play for me, please. And so the year is 2015, 2020, maybe 2025, we cannot tell for sure. All we know is that Brooklyn is under siege. Hanson Place and the other churches in the city are being ravaged. The attacking army, for their personal use, is confiscating all of our valuable items. And so the city is now under the full control. And so the leader of the army, before he leaves, he calls his trusted assistant to the side and he says to him, he gives him orders to bring certain of the children of Brooklyn with him. Children without blemish. Those who are well favored and skillful in wisdom. He wanted children who were cunning in knowledge and those who are able to understand science and language and literature. Children of Brooklyn who had in them the ability to stand in the king's palace. He wanted the elite, the cream of the crop. And so his assistant, acting under his direct orders, begins to gather young men and children and women fitting the description outlined by the king. And so one young man is selected and he's added to this chain of captives. 2 young ladies are selected and they too become links in this exclusive chain of captives. And so the search continues for several hours, but it becomes increasingly harder to find children fitting the description. And so the godly parents of those who had been selected. They stand there heavy-hearted yet proud. Eyes dripping with sadness, yet they're proud. Fists clenched with anger, but yet they're proud. Hearts pounding with fear, yet they're proud. Proud that their children had been worthy of captivity. Proud that their children were found worthy to stand in the palace of the king. Your children, however, are left behind. They're stamped, blemish, physically unsound, unfavored, unskilled, lacking intelligence, uninformed, unqualified to serve, unworthy to stand in the palace of the king. 2 Kings 24:14 tells us that only the poorest and the least skilled of the people were left behind in the land. The fairest of the people were carried off captives. And so my questions to you today are, would your child be overlooked? Would you or your child be worthy of captivity? Have you fortified yourself? Have you readied yourself physically, socially, mentally, educationally, and spiritually to be chosen? Are you able to stand, worthy to stand in the palace of the king? Can God, the King of Kings, trust you to represent him well in captivity? Worthy to stand.